Hello and welcome to another video getting you the very top grades in your poetry analysis by focusing on only five quotations. Today, unusually, the title of the poem is so important that "Storm on the Island" will be our first quotation, then this, and number 4, before ending with a short single line. As usual, I will be explaining how those 5 quotations hit the Fosse method that guarantees you a grade 7 or above, especially as it begins with form. And at the end, I will show you which of the 5 possible questions you can be asked about people, place, war, nature, or past this poem will fit. So let's begin at the beginning. Hopefully you have been taught that Stormont, up to there, is the name of the Parliament of Northern Ireland, and obviously the island is a homophone for Ireland. So at the very beginning, Seamus Heaney tells us the form of this poem is political. It is a political poem that has a political message, and our job is to kind of work out what that is. Now, the great problem for a reader here is that the political sides in Northern Ireland are really strictly drawn between Protestant and Catholic. And what we have to decide is which way Seamus Heaney is jumping, or whether he refuses to make a choice of either side. So here are some images of Stormont Castle, and look at how squat that building is. That is going to be important to the poem. Right, now we know it is a political poem. That means the structure of the poem is all one long extended metaphor. So the whole poem seems to be a description about an island in the sea which is facing a storm, but we understand that this is symbolic. And hopefully you're picking up on this subject terminology so that you can get into the grade 7. Right, let's look at the actual description. Sink walls in rock and roof them with good slate. So we have the sibilants of the repeated S sounds, which again give us this idea of a sinister mood. Now that's going to be important because we understand that the storm is sinister, but politically he's arguing that this conflict between Catholic and Protestant is also sinister. And you can reference also the harsh sounds of the T's and the C's and the K's that are repeated here, which is called consonants. Those harsh sounds give us the idea of a harsh experience the island is suffering. And that's how you spell consonants. Right, this wizened earth has never troubled us. So we've got some really negative imagery here. The earth is old. And there's some irony in this choice of word because it begins with wise. That's not how you spell wise, but it begins with the idea of wisdom, but actually ends with the idea of age. And there's an impression here that the society he's describing is wizened. In other words, it is shriveled up. So this is his way of showing that the political state in Northern Ireland is making them old and frail. It's damaging them. The other way he does that is his other choice of verbs. So instead of building walls, he does the opposite, sinking walls. So what he's suggesting here is when we build our identity, either as Protestant or Catholic, we create walls, but what we're actually doing is sinking. We're diminishing our experiences. So now the building of the house becomes a metaphor for how we're constructing something, which is the opposite of building. It's sinking. So I really love that contrast that or that juxtaposition he's put in there to easily show us that he thinks what's going on in Northern Ireland is a huge mistake. And hopefully you've stolen the word juxtaposition for your terminology at grade 7. Right, next we have a structural feature where he uses the form of direct address, so that you listen to the thing you fear. Now that's important because remember he's writing about Protestant and Catholic, but he's calling both of them you. Now on the one hand, that says, look, this division between you is not real. It is an illusion. I'm talking to both of you at the same time, and I can use the same word because you are the same thing. And then he emphasizes that with their fear. That is what they have in common. So here his political point is not that there is a real grievance between Catholic and Protestant. There isn't a real difference between the two. Actually, the problem is they're just afraid of each other, but it's their fear that they have in common. So now the poet is suggesting if they can get rid of their fear, then they'll be able to live in peace with each other. And the metaphor is if you stop fearing the storm, then the storm will have no power to destroy you. So now he imagines the sound of the storm pummeling your house too. So what he's showing us here is that any violence committed by one side is actually the same as violence committed against yourself. And what he has in mind here is the kind of tit-for-tat violence. So one side assassinates one political leader, and so the other side retaliates by doing the same. One side decides to bomb a pub where loads of Catholics drink, and therefore the Catholics bomb another pub where loads of Protestants drink. And so what you get there is that your house is being destroyed by your own actions in attacking someone else's house. Now, another useful way he uses the symbol of the house here is he's suggesting that the violence in Northern Ireland is destroying everybody's homes. They are destroying their own way of life, whereas they think they're protecting it. But actually he's saying, no, what you're doing is destroying it through your own fear. Now we get a sense of anger from Heaney, the persona in the poem, and we can hear it in the fricatives of fear and forgetting. So fricative is the technical term we have for the forming of the letter F, and significantly, when you say the letter F, you bare your teeth. Just try it now. And that is an evolutionary way of us threatening another animal. You can see it where dogs or apes, any animal, will still do this. They bare their teeth as a threatening posture. And it's no coincidence that we have fricatives at the beginning of many of our swear words, because it makes them it makes us bare our teeth and threaten the person we're speaking to. Now we also get a sense of his anger at the fact that the people he's writing to are listening not to him but to their own fears, and he wants to stop that. He wants to change it from listening to their own fears to listening to his voice of wisdom, which he's giving them in this poem, which is that we are all equal and actually we shouldn't be at war with each other. Now he personifies the sea. You might think that the sea is company. This is a bizarre image. The sea, of course, is huge and isolates us. It's the very opposite of company. Well, he does that because he's juxtaposing the reality of Ireland being isolated in the sea with the perception of the Northern Irish that what they're doing, this conflict between Protestant and Catholic, is all the world, is what matters. But instead, he's suggesting that they are isolated, that they are not like the rest of the world, and therefore should change. He emphasizes that again with the juxtaposition here of the sea exploding comfortably. These are two words that do not belong together. Now, again, this is symbolic because the way that Protestant and Catholic fought was one, through shooting, but two, through bombing places in each other's territory. And what you have here is a deliberate reference to bombing, which actually happens throughout the poem, but I've confined myself to 5 quotations. Now, the reason, obviously, he's referencing the bombing is he's saying that, look, we are becoming comfortable with these bombs. We're taking them for granted, but they're not something that we should be comfortable about. They are totally unnatural. The other thing he's suggesting is that these explosions are happening somewhere else, comfortably down on the cliffs. But what he's arguing is actually that's not that distance away. These explosions are going to get closer and closer to home. Now, this line could reference his opinion that these bombs are actually not just going to get closer to home to the people in Northern Ireland, but may also get closer to home in Britain. If so, he had some vision here, because at the time that he wrote this poem, the IRA, the bombers from the Catholic side, were not operating on the mainland of Britain. However, within a few years, they were. You know, my wife and I both grew up in London in the 1970s, and it was very common for us to be evacuated from school or from department stores or big public places because there had been a phone call claiming that a bomb had been planted or was going to go off. And in the case of schools, luckily, it was always a hoax. But in the case of the department stores, it rarely was. They usually were targets, and many people were killed. And so I'm telling you that because Heaney has this, if you choose to interpret it that way, predictive nature to his poem, where he's suggesting that this violence can only get worse. It's not going to be isolated like it is in the metaphor down on the cliffs. It's going to get closer and closer to where you live. Now he ends it with this odd throwaway line where he says, strange, it is a huge nothing that we fear. So his moral lesson is that we've got this huge fear, but actually there's nothing to be afraid of. You know, Catholic and Protestant believe in the same God. They believe in the same Jesus Christ dying to save us. They have exactly the same 10 commandments. So, you know, 99.9% of their beliefs are exactly the same. But the one belief that they're holding on to is that they have a different history and therefore should hate each other. By calling it strange, we might suppose that he's asking the reader, particularly in Northern Ireland, to pause here and think, actually, my whole life has been this experience and therefore it feels normal. But actually, if I look at it, maybe that is strange. Maybe that is bizarre. And then he emphasizes it again with this oxymoron here, where he's linking the idea of huge with the idea of nothing. And obviously he's doing that to suggest that the nothing that they fear has got a huge hold over them, and it's got a huge impact because it's leading to terrorism and death. But if we realise that it was a war and a fight over nothing, then we would be able to stop. A further illusion of nothing here, of course, is death itself. So what we're afraid of is that ultimate huge nothing, death. And if he's presenting it that way, he's saying something quite interesting. Death is only a huge nothing if you don't believe in God. So what he could be saying is that Christianity itself is the issue. In Christian belief, obviously you believe that when you die you go to heaven. And it's that belief that there is an afterlife and that God will save us, which is so attractive. So what he's suggesting here is that these strongly held Christian beliefs are only held strongly because the people who believe them fear the huge nothing of death. Death without a God is intolerable to them, and therefore they invent this fiction in this reading, this fiction of believing in a God that's going to save them. And that fiction is so strong that it allows them to then attack other people who they feel are different to them, even though they are people who believe in the same thing. They believe in the same God, the same heaven, and the same Christian morals. Now, if we go back to the title, he's asking those readers to think, this is a huge storm, but it's only on an island, and therefore we think it's something that's massive because it's affecting us, but actually it's small. It's just island sized. So he's pointing out that this is a problem that can be overcome. It's not big. And obviously the other thing that he's alluding to is that the solution needs to be political. Both sides need to come together in a political solution. Storm on the island, reminding us of Stormont, Northern Ireland. We can make one final structural point here. The ending is 4 lines long in that final stanza, whereas the previous stanzas were all 5 lines long. So perhaps we might argue that he's asking his readers to write the final line, and this final line, he hopes, will be a solution to the conflict rather than a continuation of it. And a final structural point, which will get you even more marks, is to show that it does not end with a rhyming couplet, but with a half rhyme. Empty air we fear. Fear and air, close in sound, but they don't fully rhyme. And that half rhyme gives us that feeling of unease and that feeling that things have not been resolved properly. A happy ending needs a full rhyme. Therefore, he invites us to write that final line which will solve and end the conflict. So how many of the 5 areas that you can possibly be asked about power and conflict will this poem hit? Well, obviously we can write about the people, we can clearly write about the place, we can definitely write about the war, because the whole poem is an extended metaphor for the civil war in Northern Ireland. We can definitely write about nature, though I haven't touched on it too much because I've been showing you how it's done in metaphor. You can, however, just treat it as a nature poem and take the politics out of, well, not completely out of it, but treat it as secondary. And the whole poem is about the past and how that's affecting the future, the present now, and how it will affect the future. So, interestingly, this poem is a really brilliant one to revise because it will cover you for every single question you can possibly be asked. So let me know in the comments below if you like this new short style of video. If you want to try writing in this structure to make a comparison with another poem, post it in the comments below and I might make a video out of it, who knows. Thank you very much for subscribing. See you soon on my channel.